Okay, right, so thanks for giving me the opportunity to present this work. So the title of the presentation, What Does Below but Close to 2% Mean? Assessing the ECB's reaction function with real-time data. And this is based on some recent work with Marita Palovita, Pirkka Jaasjoki, and Juha Kilponen, some colleagues from here at the Bank of Finland. So we know that the ECB defines the price stability as probably the harmonized consumer price index moving at close but below the 2%. Well, this definition still leaves something to interpretation. It's not completely clear, it's not completely fixed. So what we are trying to do in this presentation, in our paper, we are using real-time ECB forecast data. Pretty much the same information that has been available to the ECB or Eurosystem Governing Council when they carry out monetary policy decisions to infer how the ECB has in practice kind of interpreted this monetary policy target. So that's basically what we are trying to do here. So the questions we are trying to ask are, what is the de facto inflation target of the ECB? So we are basically trying to find a number, some exact number. And so also what forecast information, what information is relevant for the interest rate setting. And well, also we are also trying to address the question whether or not ECB's reactions are asymmetric or symmetric, whether or not ECB perhaps reacts more strongly to kind of higher inflation than to lower inflation. So putting these questions into a somewhat wider context, so why could this matter? Well, there are kind of several reasons why this might matter. The first thing is if you just think of the kind of households or the public, they think of, for example, they may take a household loan, well, they should somehow be able to anticipate how interest rates react. They should understand how the central bank could react in the future. And several surveys kind of indicate that, well, the general public does not perhaps have a very good understanding of what these ECB's target or objective is exactly. It is also may hamper the transmission of monetary policy. So, for example, the kind of large part of monetary policy nowadays is related to communication and kind of affecting people's expectations. But if the public really doesn't understand the basic principles of monetary policy, for example, the objective, also this transmission of monetary policy could be more difficult. A third kind of question is that if we find that the de facto inflation target is actually considerably lower than 2%, that may leave us less room to cushion negative shocks if a kind of recession comes. And so, for example, then the possibility of hitting the zero lower bound may be higher. So what our approach, we basically estimate some interest rate reaction functions where we have used as a dependent variable the Ionia interest rate, and we also have the time-varying natural interest rate. It basically use proxies as the yields of German bonds. These are safe assets. And when we use real-time quarterly data from the Eurosystem projection or forecasting exercises, the very same data that the Governing Council has been using, or an important part of the information that the Governing Council has been using when they have molded monetary policy. And well, we estimate inflation target using very simple and very standard pure forward-looking rules, using only basically the forecast estimation, forecast information. And well, then also we supplement that by using a little bit little bit more elaborate rules where the ECB may also react to past inflation. For example, if they have deviated a lot from the target, well, then the credibility of monetary policy may be at risk. Or the ECB may think that, well, they may have, for example, in view kind of medium-term price level target. So if you have veered a lot to the downside, you may want to go a little bit to the upside in the future to kind of attain this price level or this inflation target in the medium term. Before doing that, however, just let us look at some of our data. So these are just the inflation projections of the Euro system. So in the horizontal axis, you have quarters, so from 1 quarter ahead until 11 quarter ahead, so from very long, very short-term projections to kind of medium-run projections. We have also classified these kind of data so that this black line, that's the median projections which are done in the circumstances where inflation has been high. And where high means that inflation, when the projection exercise has been done, has been over 1.9%. Whereas this red line, that's the median value of these projections when inflation has been low, where low means here it's been below 1.9%. Well, what you can see is that for the short run, these kind of projections, they do vary, they do depend on the current circumstances, the current inflation when the projections have been done. But there's a pretty kind of fast convergence towards a common value. The common value is something in the range of 1.6, 1.7, 1.8. And well, one way that you could perhaps interpret these longer-term projections is that, well, that could tell you something of what the kind of ECB personnel or the ECB thinks is an inflation level which is consistent with its mandate. So this may also already been just looking at these projection exercise data may give some indication of the kind of de facto target of the ECB. And as you will see, our results from the little bit more elaborate exercises will also provide kind of roughly similar values in this range to 1.6 to 1.8. So what we then do, we do competing specifications of the reaction function. We use our estimation sample, that's from 1999, so that's when the Euro system was basically launched, until 2014. That's when the effective lower bound was reached. And we just estimate some simple linear Taylor rules where we only use this forecasting or this projection data. This is basically inflation, that's the pie, and also the second term is just output growth. So forecast of inflation and forecast of output growth. And well, then there's also a proxy for the natural rate of interest, and that's proxied by the yields of German bonds of different maturities. And the forecast horizons, that's allowed to vary from 0 to 4 quarters ahead. So we kind of do lots of different and competing specifications. And well, we also use lots of proxies for the German bonds, and we also use actually different measures for monetary policies. We use the MRO rate and the end of quarter EONIA and average EONIA. So altogether, we basically estimate something like 750 rules. So this is a little bit more kind of analytical slide, or this basically just tells you that if you just take this linear Taylor rule and you evaluate it in the situation where inflation is at its target level and also output growth is at its potential level, where the potential we kind of proxy with longer-term ECB forecasts. So here the assumption is basically that the that the longer-term forecasts tell us something about what the ECB thinks is the potential. And the natural rate is kind of constant, and then you combine that with the Fisher equation that just tells you that the nominal interest rate is inflation plus real interest rate. And you do some math, you can just infer that the inflation target can be concluded or inferred by the results or the coefficients of this simple Taylor rule. So it's basically the coefficient divided by the coefficient, or the intercept divided by the coefficient of inflation minus 1. So we really estimate these 750 model specifications, and well, we of course cannot think that all of them are good descriptions of ECB monetary policy, so we need some model selection criteria. And we used 3 criteria basically. The first one is that the Taylor principle holds, so that the ECB should react to inflation at least 1-to-1. It's a very kind of standard in the literature. Also, the central bank reacts more strongly to inflation than to real activity. That's also very standard. And the third criterion is basically that the 95% confidence bands of the inflation target must conclude some values between 1.5 and 2%, which we think is a kind of candidate or potential candidate area for this target. So let me just explain you a little bit what this third criterion means. So we have here just the range from 1.5 to 2%. Here's one model which gives you the point estimate between those two. There's the 95% band, so this model is okay. Also, this model is okay. You have the point estimate between 2% and 1.5%, although the confidence band exceeds 2%. Even this model is okay according to this criterion. The point estimate is above 2%, but it still allows for the possibility that it's below 2%. So it's not kind of, does not contradict the official criterion of price stability. And this model is also okay. However, this model I now show, this is not accepted by our criterion because the 95% confidence band does not contain any values between 2 and 1.5. And this is not okay. So these, the groups on the left, these are accepted, while the group on the right, they are not accepted. And well, I mean, we estimated these 705 model variants. Of these, 36 specifications met the model selection criteria. In 26 of these specifications, the confidence band was 2 percentage points or narrower, and in 19 specifications, the confidence band was 1 percentage point or narrower. And the general features of the reaction functions that meet the selection criteria, it's basically kind of median run inflation forecast, 1 year inflation forecast. That's what analysis about kind of suggests that the ECB uses. And output growth either nowcast or just 1 quarter ahead forecast, so very short-term kind of information and output is used. And natural rate proxies, they tend to be kind of longer-term German bond deals. We also used shorter-term 1 year and 2 year, but they do not kind of meet our criteria. So here's basically kind of the selection of results or estimates from these models that meet the criteria and where also the confidence band is 1 percentage point or wider or narrower. So what you can see is, well, there are some models which suggest that the inflation target is pretty low, so something like 1.5 or even lower. Also, there's one model which suggests that the inflation target is something like over 2. But overall, most of the models give kind of estimates in the range between 1.6 and 1.8%. And this is also pretty much in line with what we already saw by just looking at the data on the longer-term inflation forecasts. And well, here they're just the point estimates. So there's also the question of whether or not the inflation target has moved over time or changed over time, whether or not these estimates are kind of invariable in time. And well, here's just one example of one model. And well, the key takeaway is that, well, although there's some variation, the estimates tend to be rather time invariant, and which is from a statistical point of view, good news. So this was the first part, basically, of our analysis. So the very simple linear estimation, we only used forecast information while trying to infer the inflation target. In the second part, we also include possible reactions to past inflation. One motivation is that, well, if inflation has been persistently deviating from the target, the central bank may need to react more strongly in order to preserve its credibility. So that's one kind of motivation suggested in the literature. And also, well, the ECB has a medium-term inflation target. So if the central bank has kind of deviated in the past, for example, downwards, it may want to deviate a little bit more upwards in the future, just to achieve the inflation target on average in the medium run. And third kind of interpretation that I've heard from some commentators is that this could be also kind of consistent with the idea of kind of temporary price level target as suggested by Bernanke, although we do not mention this in our working paper. So basically we use the kind of very similar monetary policy rule, but now we have just they added these backward-looking credibility loss term, where the credibility loss term kind of punishes you if you have deviated very persistently, something like very persistently from the inflation target. Typically, the good specifications that we found, deviating persistently means that you have deviated for something like 6 quarters to 8 quarters, so 1.5 years or 2 years you've been too high or too up. And well, here are some just kind of graphical illustrations what this term looks like for 2 inflation targets. So one target is 2.1 and the other target is 1.7. Well, there is some deviation upwards at the beginning of the millennium, 2001. Then, well, we are pretty close to the target, so there's not that much deviation after that. There's positive deviation just before the financial crisis, and, well, notably very large kind of negative deviation after 2014, basically. And, well, we also have to have some model selection criteria. We use pretty similar model selection criteria as we did in the case of these very simple linear rules. So the coefficients must be significantly different from 0 and consistent with the Taylor principle. And coefficients of projected inflation rates should be larger than coefficients of real GDP growth and stable coefficients. Pretty much the same selection criteria as before. And, well, we just have here a couple of tables summarizing the results, but, well, here just the main takeaway that one kind of specification that meets very well our selection criteria is the one where central banks' inflation target is 1.7 or 1.6, and it reacts symmetrically both to deviations upwards and also downwards. We also kind of analyze some asymmetric reaction functions where you may react more strongly, for example, when you are above the target than below the target. And, well, then we get a somewhat higher inflation target, is about 2%. Well, we also kind of do some nonlinear estimation, and, well, from this nonlinear estimation, we also get the inflation target of 1.6%. So the final thing that we do is that we do some dynamic out-of-sample predictions with our monetary policy rules. So we have basically estimated these monetary policy rules until 2014, when we reach the zero lower bound. However, what we do in these exercises, we kind of ask the question, what kind of interest rate would these rules have predicted for the more recent period? So what kind of stance? And then we compare these predictions to so-called shadow rate rate estimates. And here we use the shadow rate estimates by colleague Tomi Kortela. The shadow rates, they try to capture both conventional monetary policies, but also unconventional monetary policies, such as forward guidance and asset purchases. And well, I mean, here comparing these rules, we see that this rule with a backward-looking term, where the central bank reacts symmetrically and where the inflation target is 1.7 or 1.8, that actually is quite well in line with the shadow rate. So that kind of suggests that, that this rule may kind of suggest that the ECB, even under unconventional policies, may have acted according to the same principles as in the previous period, just using different tools. So you can't use conventional monetary policy, but you have used unconventional monetary policy. And that kind of gives also some support that this backward-looking, partially backward-looking rule where the inflation target is something like 1.6 or 1.7, that could be a good candidate. So kind of final slide, what does below but close to 2% mean? So our key finding is that de facto inflation target lies between 1.6 and 1.8%. We have three sources of evidence. So the Eurosystem medium-term inflation forecast converges towards this so-called de facto target, so just looking at the data. We also have estimates from linear forward-looking rules that point to that direction, and also estimates from non-linear rules with past inflation gaps. So thank you.
Governor, the audience, thanks for the invitation. This paper was a pleasure to read. It was very innovative, well written, and the conclusion was very clear. The target that ECB is having is below 2%. It's between 1.6 and 1.8. It's not 2%, or the 2% target is asymmetric. I'm going to talk about 4 points here. First is the importance of the main findings. I here comment the importance and influence of the findings, and here I find that the paper, of course, very, very innovative and important. The point number 2 is about the implications of the results. Here I relate your findings to the literature where Governor also referred to the literature where that considers different monetary policy strategies like GDP, nominal GDP targeting, or different price level targets. 2 other points are rather brief, since, well, number 3 is about difficulty of forecasting. In the central bank context, this is an important point because monetary policy should be conducted for the future purposes. We should try to target and see what is happening around the corner. That's why forecasting is particularly important for the central banks. And the 4th is a brief methodological point. First of all, this is an influential paper. Oh, something has happened to our graphs here, but on the right-hand side, you can see our forecasts for the ECB. We believe that you are going to start hiking rates at the end of next year, and then you will continue hiking 3 times in 2020. And this is based on actually partly on your findings, Markus. We see that inflation is going to increase up to 1.6 or 1.7%, and then validates the hikes in the interest rate. So at least we, as a market force, we believe you what you are doing here. And this is not only influential, but this is only highly topical paper because this relates to the discussion of right inflation targeting. On the right-hand side, is one way of illustrating your result. Your symmetric target is somewhere between 1.6 and 1.8%, which means that if the inflation falls behind the target, then you don't mind if the subsequent inflation overshoots, and over the medium term you would then converge to the symmetric target. And as far as I'm concerned, and as far as I have read literature correctly, this relates pretty well to the price level targeting. And this is shown on the left-hand side. The blue line shows that if the inflation falls first behind the price level targeting, but then you don't mind if it overshoots and catches up with the price level targeting, and then you are okay with the symmetric target. But in case of a 2% target, you find it's asymmetric, and there you would start being very worried if inflation increases up to 2%, and that's why you tend to stay below the initial price level permanently, and that's why you don't stimulate the economy as quickly and as fiercely as in the symmetric target. So actually your finding relates well to the speculation that what would be the right monetary policy strategy. Would it be price level targeting, average inflation, or nominal? What the nominal anchors would be the best targets. And in this context, I did some extra reading, and I came across with another paper from the Riksbank, and this is a pretty nice sort of overview of the different targets. And according to them, there's no clear benefits from alternative targets if your target is symmetric and, of course, time consistent, meaning that market participants believe in your policy where you allow inflation to overshoot of the recession. So you would be okay if your target is symmetric. And you have a nice discussion in your paper between these different targets. Of course, problem with symmetric target is that because it's below 2%, someone may argue that is it then too low for stimulative purposes? Do you have enough room for stimulus if your symmetric target is so clearly below 2%? Of course, if it's 2%, you lack speed of stimulus. So with the symmetric target, you get rid of this problem. But since there is some sort of unclarity between those targets, this of course creates another difficulty for the decision making, because at least market participants and market forces may become, confused about your targets. And this context, I refer to a censored unknown market force that tweeted about this recently, which just is an example of how we see things here in the dealing room. And now I have censored Sanna's face here because I don't want you to be blamed about this, but this is just how we see things, that you tend to be overly worried about high inflation, then you tend to hike rates in situation where, at least in retrospect, you shouldn't have hiked rates. And we see this as a problem. Now it seems that I'm using too much time here. I need to speed up. So I have then a few other points about, well, let me think. Maybe I just comment briefly on this, that now that you would be okay with symmetric target with respect to other monetary policy strategies, but then someone could ask that is 1.6 or 1.8 then too low a target? And here I have read another paper of your colleagues who says that 1.6 or our current targets are not that low if unconventional monetary policy is available and the natural interest rate is positive. But then you have difficulties if you don't want to use unconventional policy, or if the natural rate is actually negative. And now we have heard and seen many graphs earlier today that the natural rate has become very close to zero. It might be even negative. And if the natural rate falls below zero, then 1.6% target might be too low for stimulative purposes. Okay, then I skip this one and have two brief other remarks if you don't mind. One is about forecasting. Now that the optimal monetary policy should respond to the projected future path of the economy, and because monetary policy have such long time lags, forecasting is especially important for you. And in your paper, you show that your forecasting ability falls quickly after the fourth quarter, so you don't really see what is happening in a year from now. And this is not only your problem, this is also it's a common problem in our industry. The right-hand side figure shows you how IMF has fared in this business. IMF has been able to forecast 9 recessions out of 212 recessions during past 25 years. So they haven't been that good either. And I can't claim that I would be any better at this respect. So, but this is of course very important for you because you should be able to know where the inflation is heading. And that's why we should do all the possible things to improve our forecasting abilities. And finally, very briefly about the instrumental variable estimation, since my background is in microeconometrics and in panel data estimation, every time I was using IV methods, I was concerned about first the strength of the instruments. And that's why I'm making this comment that you don't talk about the strength of your instruments in your paper. And at least in microeconometric context or panel data context, if instruments are very weak, then you are having serious troubles. But of course, you are now using time series methods, so this sort of weakness or comment may be less valid. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Sorry. Thanks very much, Aki, for your comments. Please, Markus, maybe with very few sentences, you could just comment on Aki, and then we'll take 1 or 2 questions from the audience, as this is indeed an interesting topic.
So many thanks for the very valuable and useful comments. So just a couple of comments. So on kind of the interpretation of the results, I kind of agree with you. So this discussion on price level targets or medium level inflation targets. So that's also kind of our view that some of the results may really kind of indicate that the ECB, it's not that bygones are completely bygones because, well, the ECB has its medium-term inflation targets. So it may kind of react even within its kind of current mandate. So there's a kind of wide range, at least in my opinion, of kind of this medium-term inflation target and also the price level target. Also the kind of alternative targets, the asymmetric or the symmetric target. I think you kind of mentioned that might cause some confusion which one of these is the right one. So kind of our current understanding is that our results pretty much kind of lend more support to the symmetric target. So I mean overall of below 2%. So the whole, just looking at the data and the linear and the non-linear combinations. Then finally, forecasting, that's pretty hard, and especially those longer-term forecasts. So that's why in our paper we have really used these longer-term forecasts more as a kind of indication that may tell us something about the ECB's inflation target. So you saw that these forecast inflation targets, they tend to converge to a single number, something like the 1.6 to 1.8. So these longer-term longer end of this forecast, we use that information kind of, not in the estimations, but just to kind of give some backup for our other results. So thank you.
Okay, please, Markus, maybe there's one question from the audience. If not, we'll say thank you for Markus and Aki.